Doki Doki Literature Club was a mistake, but the Purist Mod was premeditated. It's been well over 6 months since the Purist Mod release, and I want to share my thoughts on what the ride has been over the pretty much 1.5 years since the entire project got started. Hey, I'm TK. I'm an amateur tier writer who probably doesn't deserve the time of day and a longtime appreciator of DDLC. I say this as someone who found and played through the work long before its explosion in popularity. For those who remember the sub 800 days, this was when the DDLC Discord was rather small, and when we spurged out throwing ourselves at a puzzle, Dan tossed us in the updated weekend scene, with us eventually figuring it out due to a hint on LilmonX3's Twitter bio. With that out of the way, I thought it would be a good idea to revisit the roots of the project, then detail things that happened along the way while talking about what I thought of it as the days went by, and show some screenshots of the development. I'll be censoring names from here on out, except for my own, just to give a semblance of privacy to those involved in the project, with a few necessary exceptions. My hope with this is to provide a comprehensive archive of how the project went, along with a small analysis on the development cycle, and ultimately, to finally lay this project to rest. This project was actually started on a whim, and originally didn't even have a name. In the Space Classroom chat, it was a frequent notion to play around with the idea of what DDLC would be like if it was a normal VN. The Monica Afterstory mod had been released at this point, and soon enough I learned that DDLC was done with Python, a language I was familiar with. From there, the idea was born, with Garnet Sunset making the modding toolkit I programmed the mod on. It wasn't even really fleshed out or anything, we were just having fun with ideas. Having had played a fairly sizable list of visual novels, whenever we talked about scenes, I was always thinking about what VN I would go to and grab a BG from. I know a lot of people had issues with taking BGs from other VNs, but this was before DDLC was mainstream or anything, or a semblance of a modding community had really begun. This would just be a small fan project that a small community would share and have a laugh over. Nothing more. Back then, I was mostly the only writer. I had already written a pretty shoddy Sayori fan script that is probably still pinned somewhere in the DDFC. You could say it was pretty much a ripoff of the Sachi route from The Fruit of Grisaya, a visual novel that I enjoy. It hit most of the same beats really, and I'll leave a link in the description to my scene-by-scene walkthrough. However, the main core of Sayori's route was the same while I was still writing it, a lack of confidence in the fact she deserves the MC's love and affection. During this time, I had lazied out and Monica wasn't going to be self-aware. She was going to be slightly clingy but less psycho, and there was a time I had toyed with the idea of doing a cliche, fake relationship becomes real. I had some of it written up, but it never really progressed much further than the first day. Essentially, Monica was the trophy girl of the school, and so boys would just want to date her to say that they were. Monica trusted the MC enough not to be like that, and so she wanted to experience something real in parallel to her situation in DDLC. This would put strains on the club members' relationships in one another, and so on. Natsuki was going to be written to have self-confidence issues, albeit in a different vein than Sayori, and Yuri was going to have overpossessiveness born from a lack of social interactions and the fact that the MC was the first person she really opened up to. In the early stages, Sayori's route was probably going to be the most difficult. Obviously, people would want us to address her depression, but not having had a real personal dealing with it, or knowing someone who did, I had to try to find a different way of handling it. As soon as we had more writers, we were slowly going towards the idea of not solving the depression itself, but rather Sayori's confidence in herself and the MC's affection for her, which pushed her to seek out treatment and ultimately choose life. One thing that never made it into the final version was the idea of ghosts. Essentially small hints that DDLC still happen, tiny Easter eggs. They don't actually affect the game, they were just tucked away somewhere for people to find. It's actually the reason why the FAQ, in response to the question, will there be horror, our response was, only if you go looking for it. Personally, I'm glad it never made it into the final game because 1, it would be a real pain to code, and 2, it would have just bogged down the narrative. It would have been kind of a neat idea, but when the overall narrative of the mod essentially made it a sequel to DDLC, it also became unnecessary, as Monica herself confirms the events of the base game happened. It was around this time we started to wonder if we could have a self-aware Monica, and the groundwork was laid for what would eventually become the Monica route. The early portions had a lot more interaction between the player and Monica, although we would run into a roadblock with that later, namely how to deal with the MC. We slowly started accumulating other writers at this point, with one of them helping out on the Natsuki route, although this wasn't Ninja, who would eventually become its lead writer. We started to hammer out how to deal with her plot, and also how to deal with the festival aftermath. Since the whole point of reading poems was to gain more members, this is something we'd have to deal with. We toyed around with the idea of having more members and then dissipating, but ultimately we thought it was easier just for them to never show up. Further along the line of Natsuki's route, we did actually think of having the MC and her dad fight. We even entertained the idea of running away, a la Yumiko from The Fruit of Grisaya, if you're noticing a trend. While we would write specific dialogue separately, we mostly collaborated on the general structure of each route and the plot events. I'll admit the Natsuki route was rather silly at first, since running away from home, hiding in a hotel, skipping school, and then confronting her dad, with Natsuki being the one to defuse the situation, is pretty silly. But then again, it's not like we were really serious about this. This had just been a meme of a project, really, something done on a whim without any overarching goal in the end. That was all about to change. It was around this time that we moved from a small group DM to an actual Discord server, if only for organizational purposes. It would be easier to have a channel dedicated to each route, along with a general dev chat area for general purpose chatting. We had also opened up applications, if only because we couldn't do everything ourselves, but didn't want to say, open the floodgates. While I've never seen it myself, I did hear some people criticize us for this down the line, in that it seemed very elitist. I don't know how big of a sentiment this was, but since it never really seemed to come onto the server, I'm just going to say it was probably a very small minority. For me, it came across as a way to not bloat the project, so that way 60 new people wouldn't suddenly come in on it. More people makes for a more complex project, and this was to keep it as smooth as possible. At this point, the team arrangement was Space Core writing the Natsuki route, Snake writing the Yuri route, Nullspace writing the Monica route, and me writing the Sayori route while it was still in its crappy Sachi route clone wannabe form. I wasn't exactly confident in my ability to write her route, but I felt like I could at least put together a coherent narrative based on her character. I wouldn't be giving everyone what they wanted, but rather the story I thought made the most sense with her in mind. Some people had also come around asking if they could donate to the project. We quickly shot that down out of concerns of copyright, and also to me, this was mostly just for fun. Nothing spoils fun quite like getting money involved. The days progressed normally from here, with all of us getting through life and writing, along with Garnet figuring out how to get us to the point of actually being able to import all of our scripts into the game. And then came a new member. His name was Xenoleaf, who has also gone by the handle Zeno Hayes and now just Zeno last time I checked, which is how I'll refer to him from here. We'll get into the ballad of Zeno down the road, as it's non-trivial to say the least. I'll be courteous and just say he was the source of a lot of stress when it came to the mod's actual completion, but we'll get more into that later. Apparently, he wrote and published, his words, not mine, a document that analyzed Sayori and how to deal with her depression. Frankly, I bought it because I didn't want to write the Sayori route, since again I felt like my writing would be weak, and was content to let go of the route's reins. He had high hopes for this mod, let's put it that way. So much so that he called in sick from work to work on this mod, but he also claimed that he had caught a cold, which is why he was taking off. I won't get into the validity of these statements, but Zeno, as I said I'll call him, frequently cited migraines, headaches, and sickness as reasons why progress was slow on the mod. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, as I personally don't know anyone with such frail health, and sure, it could entirely be true. We also had a new writer on the Natsuki route, Zagoldo, as Space was a little hesitant about how well he could do it, along with an actual poet by the name of Sadist Poet who would help us write poems for the girls. That didn't make it into the final game really, and I believe both of them kind of just disappeared halfway through the project. We also had an artist by the name of Gintoki join, who was originally going to make backgrounds. There were some minor road bumps at this point, because there was some friction in the ideas we had for the mod, especially in whether or not we wanted to keep things like Sayonara in the game. Zeno wanted it out entirely. Scissor wanted it in, potentially, since it was a possible ending you could get. and then Zeno wanted to have a big formal meeting to decide on the decision the route would go. We did end up having this meeting just to formalize where things were heading. Also on the side, Gintoki was trying to map out the entire school, and life went on. The first big road bump was Nullspace pulling out of the project due to life events. Zeno attempted to take on the Monica route too, but Scissor intervened and I ended up moving full-time into the Monica route, writing solo. While I sorted things out about taking over the route, Zeno was being introduced to r/waifuism, Space was having another crisis about his writing, and Gintoki was busy shading and whatnot. Life continued to go on. Eventually, despite all of these shenanigans, we had the first snippets of the game. The intro of the game was far different than how we eventually had it, obviously. You interacted directly with the MC, having a complete split in terms of who was who. Of course, this was when we had the MC be a completely different character, and we hadn't completely hammered out what the divide between the MC and player was. We got some feedback from the preview, especially about how to characterize Monica, and we added some more choices such as no one deserves what happened versus there's someone I want to see happy. Someone also suggested Monica rub it in your face if you got a bad end for a route, and we all thought that was a great idea. We eventually hammered out exactly what we wanted the dynamic between the MC and the player to be, opting for something that kind of blended the two, which I try to take care of in my route, with the small little text cues that indicated the MC was eventually just seen as a vessel of the player by Monica by the end. But as for the preview itself, our options were pretty limited. We were using the game's OST, no new art assets, and everything would have to be carried by the dialogue. Granted, that's how I planned for all of this to go at the start. It's not like we had any grand illusions of building some massive VN from this project. Like I said, it started small, we didn't have any large goals. This entire project was started on a whim, for fun, and to play with ideas. That was a sentiment I tried to stick with the whole time, and it would be the cause of much grief down the line. Tamachi, Fjord, and Peachcake later joined. Zigoldo left, and we had another writers' meeting about when routes were supposed to be finished. The goal was to have all outlines done by Christmas of 2017. Yes, that's right, 2017. Garnett had a medical thing come up, Ninja submitted his application and was accepted. From there, the team of writers mostly solidified into what it was at the end. Zeno on Sayori's route, Ninja on the Natsuki route, Protag and Snake on Yuri's route, and yours truly on the Monica route. Around this time, Twiggy sent in a motherfucking draft of a theme, and so when people ask how we got a composer, I will be 100% honest here and say it was sheer dumb fucking luck. Later on, editors and our background artists would join, but for the most part, this was the team. Members of the team worked mostly independent from each other. Writers, of course, communicated with one another and would ask for readovers and opinions of first drafts. Editors like Space and Scissor would look over finished pieces and give tips. As for the art, there was a dedicated Google spreadsheet to keep track of the progress of requested artworks and where writers could put their requests in detail. The original plan had been 2 CGs per girl, but we sliced it to 1 because we felt we were asking too much of the artist. Artists would then PM writers and hash out exactly what things would look like. Twiggy worked mostly independently, though would give us samples of various pieces for us to critique and point out what we liked and didn't like. Additionally, he worked with each writer to make sure they felt that each girl's theme he composed fit with their respective doki. Scissor and I were effectively project managers, but that didn't really mean too much. It kind of was just a designated person who would monitor progress on stuff. It's not like we had hard deadlines or anything and had to force people to get their work done, it was mostly just suggestion. As for programming and debugging, I handled all of the programming outside of Garnett giving us the mod toolkit. I learned Ren'Py, how to make it go, and took care of adding all assets into the game and making it work. And yes, due to the Yuri route delays, I actually had to code on paper because I didn't have access to my desktop or laptop while at my summer job, so I'd write in all the expressions and transitions on the page and then type it up later. Debugging was mostly Ninja's job, and he did a pretty decent job at it. We had a dedicated coding channel set up where he'd play through a route and then let me know about lines that ran off the box, broken transitions, etc. It wasn't the perfect well-oiled machine, but I'd like to think of it as kind of like working at a brand new startup. Everyone just kept to themselves and did their jobs with communication as necessary. For the most part, I powered through the Monica route. I had my outline done by Christmas, and almost all of it was written by the time 2018 rang in. Most of it was just bogged down by me having to reread the entire common route and rework it for the final idea of the Monica route. But by the 31st of January 2018, I was pretty much done. Ninja was very speedy about his route as well, getting it done fairly quickly. As for the Yuri writers, I don't really know what exactly happened, but life got in the way a lot. When people say the Yuri route felt rushed, that's because it frankly was. It was the last one to be written, and that's because we had to actively push them into it. It wasn't until the summer of 2018 did they actually finish writing it, and I had a summer job then, necessitating me coding on paper during my train commute in order to maximize the time I had to work on it. However, for the most part, they weren't exactly stressful in terms of will this project ever actually finish. This left Zeno's delays. Zeno had a lot of interesting claims on why he was constantly getting delayed. I will, as I have said before, give him the benefit of the doubt here. I would also like to note that I did not reach out to Zeno about any of these claims, as he has been known to walk back on things he said and deny DMs and claim they were photoshopped. Additionally, we parted on less than amicable terms, and I would say there is definite hostility from him to me. But I can assure you that none of these segments I'm posting have been photoshopped, and if I were any better at censoring names on a video, I would scroll through my Discord and just scrub out all the names as I scroll by. This is also a case I will not censor his name, just as proof that he actually said it and that it wasn't someone else. Among his claims were that, of course, he was pained by sickness, migraines, and generally had to stay in bed. He also claimed depression, which again, benefit of the doubt, shaky sanity, that he had stage fright and didn't want to post things on the Google Doc, so he'd rather write offline and then just copy and paste, meaning we wouldn't see it, his computer overheating, his friends leaving him in dramatic fashions, and frequent lack of confidence. He also had a bit of an issue with the DDLC community in general, but that's straying off topic, though it would frequently come up. He claimed to get bullied just for having a Sayori profile picture, which was never actually proven to us, but for the most part, we believed him, or at least for myself, just pretended to believe him and roll along with it because I found that notion really silly without any actual proof. But let's go back to the lack of confidence. If we got $1 every time Zeno came into the chat one day and talked about how he was a failure of a writer and shouldn't be allowed to write the Sayori route, we would be stinking rich. And if we got $2 every time one of us had to cheer him up or something like that, I could drown in dollar bills. There were a lot of incidents like this, each one growing more exhaustive than the last. After a while, it really just became an exercise, and there were a few of us in another private chat who would grumble about it and essentially take turns being the one to deal with Zeno's latest cry for attention. One of us claimed to know a bit about psychology and pretty much outlined it that Zeno probably wasn't serious about any of this, especially when he would threaten to kill himself, and was probably just looking for attention. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but again, here's some screenshots if you want to make your own judgment call. I'll be touching more on this later. Zeno also caused the second big road bump, which was Gintoki leaving due to an increasing amount of tension between the two. This culminated in a big argument between them, where Zeno got angry about suggestions on how we had to put Sayori through some kind of torment, or the story would just feel empty. Zeno took issue with this because to him, Sayori was not a fictional character with which you tell a story, but a real-life person he shouldn't torture for any reason. Gintoki was just giving him feedback about part of his story when the two eventually had this argument that everything had been building up to, and Gintoki, having had enough of dealing with Zeno, just left. I won't say that it wasn't unjustified, which I've said before, but I'll get into it later. Anyways, it was around this time that we started to gain some traction. The official Purist Mod Twitter was made, and apparently some journalists from Kotaku followed us, and we were soon approaching 250 followers on the Twitter. Ninja wanted to do something special for 250 followers, though personally I thought it was overkill. Remember, I never intended for this project to become like this. Stuff like previews, a Twitter, and all this other stuff wasn't supposed to happen, like an indie game or something like that. This mentality of mine that it was just all supposed to be for funsies would really come to a head here, and would be a great source of stress from here on out. I'm going to take a brief aside here to talk about the various previews. I'll just brush over them and what my opinion was on them. Let me first say that I'm not a PR person. I'm sure it generated quite a bit of hype for each respective girl, but my mentality wasn't to make this into some full-blown game that needed hype behind it. It's like the fan fiction that I've written for a few years now. It's not really to get big or to get noticed, it's just for fun and to play with ideas and maybe improve my writing. As the programmer, I was in charge of making the previews because, of course, I would edit the scripts to put the text on the screen. Twiggy would supply the snippet of music needed, and the respective writers chose which segment they wanted to make a preview of, and then that was all forwarded to me. I'd code it up, record it, align the music, render the video, and upload it. I will say that previews weren't exactly a big deal to make. They maybe took an hour tops each. My issue with them was mostly that it just felt like everyone was taking the project way too seriously. It was seriously burning me out because I'd have to arrive to everyone treating this like a job when it was supposed to just be for fun. I'll also say this to our longtime followers, I really don't mean to narc on you guys, but hot damn, did I find myself really annoyed at those following the mod sometime. For most of you guys, you were pretty chill, but it was this tiny subset. The people who had staked everything on the mod, as in the ones who would come in and talk on end about how they couldn't wait to save their waifu, be happy with their waifu, and on and on and on. It was like getting this massive weight put on your back you didn't want. Everyone was staking their happiness on our mod. Combine this with some of the developers taking this too seriously for my taste, Zeno's almost daily my writing is crap routine, feeling burned out because of all this, and I was about that close to quitting. Yeah, you heard me right. I very well nearly quit the mod. I had also made plans for my exit. Like, just these plans of, well, I'm leaving so long and good fucking luck were made, which would leave the team without a programmer who understood all the code, and to me, someone who had the original vision in mind, and I would speculate with friends about how long it would take for the project to maybe unravel and collapse. I have to say, for the most part, I don't think I've ever wanted any project of mine to fail. When I write a story, I usually want to bring it to its end successfully and see it there. That was not the case with the Purist Mod in winter of 2018. I wanted nothing more than for it to crash, burn, and die with how annoyed I was. I was so burned out from it that despite getting an offer from another VN maker, like a legit professional one, who had reached out to me about writing for their VN, because I frequently cited my love for Gen Urobuchi and Nietzschean philosophy, and I also knew a bit about the mythology they were looking for. They wanted me to write with them. I turned it down because I was so damn done writing in general, or doing anything creative. I had friends telling me I should leave the project because it was clearly taking its toll on me, as I had nothing but complaints for them every day. I won't blame the project in particular, but it was also hilariously correlated with me actually falling ill around this time. I say this as someone who gets sick exactly 4 times a year, whenever the seasons change, and so getting sick in the middle of winter is not usual. I ended up forcing myself to stick it out, mostly because the artists were still on board. I have art major friends, and I know how hard it is to do art professionally. I felt like I'd be wasting all of their time and effort if I left, so I told myself I'd have to stick with it no matter how much I hated it because of the artist. So really, if there's anyone you want to credit for the fact this mod even got done, credit the artist. But know that by March of 2018, I was done with this project, and I wouldn't have minded if it had collapsed on itself and died out. With my personal idea of the previews out of the way, let's focus a little more on each of the route's completions. These will be more short snippets since it's not like there's a lot to trace, as it's not like all of the routes went through major rewrites, although some of them could, as even their writers will admit. So there isn't a lot to say here actually for the Yuri route. For the most part, we had just left Snake and Protag to do their own thing, and due to a lot of life circumstances, I guess, things just got delayed. I did hand them my solo outline, but I'm not sure how much of it ended up going into the final work. After a while, we had to actively pressure them around the end to get it done, if only because they were the last route that had yet to be done. If you say the Yuri route was rushed, as I said before, and that it was very short, well, you can blame us for it, I guess. Most of us kind of just wanted to be done, and they still hadn't finished by the time summer was approaching. And like I said, I had limited time to do coding work because I had a summer job. There were concerns after the first draft that it was too short, but no one really thought too much of it. It's not like we had to hit a length requirement or anything like that. Anyways, Ninja stepped in near the end, enough to a substantial degree that he could be cited as one of the writers. As for what we ended up thinking of the route, I will save that for a later section. There were some scenes that ended up getting scrapped, but that was mostly due to a lack of organization on their part. This was because I believe one of them wrote the first half and the other wrote the second, and while they had worked on a rough plot line, had worked mostly independently from each other. This meant having to stitch the two parts together, which was slightly messy, to put it lightly. Either way, it somehow got completed, especially with Ninja's help. If there's any route that arguably had the most transformation, it would be Natsuki's route. As I stated before, it started off as a weird mix of Makina and Yumiko's route from the Fruit of Grisaya. I'll admit that since I was the main writer at the beginning, this is my fault, as I really loved the Grisaya series, especially the first work. The general plot line was as follows. Fairly standard romance stuff at the start. Natsuki came running to your house, and then after a while the two of you ran off together to hide. Natsuki would get pissed at you for throwing everything away from her, but you know, tsundere. Eventually, you were discovered, and the dad would come with hell to pay, along with the police force, because you had, kind of kidnapped his daughter in a way. The stalemate ended with Natsuki pretty much exposing her dad and generally causing a scene so that people would side with her, since it wasn't entirely inconceivable to think that people would, upon seeing this kid pretty much accusing the dad of abuse, side with her. Either way, a few major issues with this original plotline. Obviously, how do you deal with the MC missing school and what his parents would think? The original solution to this was to have scenes beforehand that established MC had a decent relationship with his parents. Phone calls, lines that the MC knows his parents are on standard anime business trips, the like. Then, when he's about to take his great runaway journey with Natsuki, he would call his parents, who don't pick up the phone, maybe they're busy, and he explains that he's going to do something fairly drastic and be like, hey mom, dad, don't worry about me. It's cheesy, kind of heartwarming-ish, gets the job done. Fortunately, we scrapped this dumbass idea and started working on something a hell of a lot more workable and less over the top. I had a leftover outline of the original Natsuki route, as in back when I was writing solo, these were plans I had made for myself, pre-insane kidnapping Grisaya ripoff version, which I believe some elements made their way into the final version. See this video for a full scene-by-scene breakdown of that version. Ninja brought more sense to the team after joining, helping to reel things back in, mainly because this kind of shit would be way too difficult to pull off cleanly. Of course, now we had to decide what to do with the dad. We didn't want to make him super evil, obviously, to the point of like, I eat raw puppies without any milk for breakfast. Ninja wanted something more along the lines of him just being a thorn in MC's side rather than being straight up malicious, which was something I could get behind. We also had some road bumps in the ending, namely how having the dad turn himself in felt anticlimactic. However, it was eventually decided that it would be the MC's choice on whether or not the dad would turn himself in. This was a move I could get behind, mostly because to me, it just felt like everyone wanted a reason to hate the dad, and so we would do something a little unexpected. Not make him completely a good guy, but just a guy who had made a mistake and was trying to move past it. Regardless, after that, Ninja moved into the head writer position due to having the most free time out of all the Natsuki writers, and so the writing began. From there, after Ninja's vision and writing, no one seemed to have a major problem with it. So where do I begin with Sayori's route? Well, for one, that it was the first one with a draft, considering how I had that first draft that's still floating around. You can find the scene-by-scene breakdown here. Highlights include Sayori getting hit by a bus in the bad ending. Regardless, once Zeno took the reins, the route was very much transformed. For the most part, he seemed to have things fairly under control compared to the chaos that was the Natsuki route, where we had a lot of random ideas that we had to get under control, and so I don't really have too much to say in terms of how it transformed. There were occasional hiccups, though, like Zeno being fiercely opposed to including the Sayonari scene as a bad end. Our reasoning for including it was that it was a way to kick the player right in the gut. Most people would be doing Sayori's route specifically to avoid that scene. So, what better way to punish a mistake than giving you exactly what you wanted to avoid? Oh no, Zeno wouldn't have that. Like, Indy threatened to quit over it, but by this point we had already kind of just taken it for granted Zeno would threaten to quit over the smallest thing. Zeno, instead, insisted he could write something that would destroy the players more than that. If you ask me, Sayori's bad end felt a little too over the top, and while I think most players would be cognizant of the fact that yes, when you're clearly on the bad end, you know what's coming, that the writer could play it 100% seriously and turn what is considered a meme scene into something serious just by the writing alone. Because that's what the power of writing can do. Of course, he didn't take that option. You could say there was also a lot of troubles in Zeno's commitment to his route, as in commitment to that it was actually good enough, but not really in the sense that you think. More on that later. Ultimately, we didn't get to see a ton of evolution unlike the other routes. Zeno mostly just kept to himself and then handed us a final draft after we had gotten everyone to start writing more. If you want to know why it didn't go under much scrutiny, as I've kept saying whenever it relates to Zeno, we'll just cover that later. And also, we were just wanted to be done dealing with him. So there were a lot of things we could have done with Monika's route. At the start, it was going to be a very clear divide between player and MC, with the player actually sending MC out to be essentially, living rather than controlling him, and would have been something that probably would have pissed Monika fans off because everyone knows Monika wants to get with the player, not the MC. I blame this mostly on my appeal of AI learning to become human-like. Fortunately, this was quickly scrapped and we began plotting out on how to actually approach this in a relatively smart way. Noel was quick to point out that Monika's part would have her wanting to have a good time, but she feels like it's under false pretenses, especially considering how she held you hostage in Act 3. Noel also wanted something where the MC and player existed like two sides of the same coin. One can't exist without the other. Monika kind of brushes off MC's words because he's a puppet though, but at least he got to say something and had his own feelings on the matter. Unfortunately, Noel ended up pulling out, and I was left to the task of having to come up with the rest. Before he left, he at least did give me the initial Monika route idea, which formed the basis of what I would write. There was a lot of struggle on the interplay between the MC and player, although at the end we decided to go for a mixed strategy. Something of a blend which translated into the player interacting through the MC, and as the Monika route has it, Monika coming to see no distinction between the MC and player, viewing them essentially as the same entity, as you act through him, as the player has limitations on what they can do. Essentially, this is implied by the other three routes and their choices. You don't have free god reign, essentially. This was also highlighted in the points where you made a choice. The MC didn't hear what was being said at first, but he could tell it was clearly saying something, but later on though, he is capable of hearing your choices, indicating some kind of synthesis. Also, in points earlier on in the route, instead of Monika confronting the MC during the weekend scene, he just passed out. This was done away with because the MC randomly fainting was just way too convenient and very, very dumb, and just bad writing. Then we considered having the MC and player talk to each other, though this ruined the blending, so it was ultimately thrown out. At first, there was only one way to get onto the Monika route, which was decided early on would be unlocked after the other three girls, though after some comments from the others, I inserted 3 choices that can get you onto the Monika route once it's unlocked. Most people, I found though, will simply hone in on the fact that there's a choice in the beginning and they'll pick the one that locks you onto the Monica route. Either way, after it came over to me, I wrote the outline, the first draft, and there wasn't too much to change from there outside a few monologues the MC had in order to better carry the plot. So, the release was fine. Reviews ran up and down the scale. I was somewhat annoyed at myself when there was a lot of yells of cuck shit from /VG, as to me that meant I hadn't conveyed the idea that the MC and player were a blended entity to Monica by the end well enough, but overall feedback seemed good. A few people discovered the cheat codes I put in, but those were more Easter eggs as a just for funsies thing, though a few references went over people's heads. There were some hilarious bugs, including one that crashed people at the credits. The issue was the Natsuki CG was actually really big, and I hadn't picked up on it. Renpy probably just allocated more on my computer, or I had more RAM, so it would, when you loaded this CG, it would actually go over the amount of space Renpy was allocated as a process. This made for hilarious times when you'd crash at the credits and then would wipe all your saves. Though I could have sworn the save purging was after the credits, but it was still kind of funny nonetheless. I wish I could have picked up on it earlier, and no one else seemed to pick up on it either actually. Ninja, Space, and I believe Scissor all ran through it on their computers just fine, so I have no idea what the actual issue was, if it was just Renpy taking up a lot more RAM than it should have. I don't know. But like I said, feedback was mostly positive. There were a few people who disliked Monica's route because it felt more like an MC and Monica romance, which I again continue to kick myself over and wonder how I could have improved on making the blend more apparent. Although the most recent patch makes this more explicit rather than relying on Monica's dialogue alone. Yuri's route I think received the rockiest reception due to it being the shortest and, as the writers admit themselves, being very silly. However, I kind of think they at least succeeded in making Yuri something other than a stabbing and cutting meme, and I think most people were glad to see she wasn't insanely obsessed with the MC. Natsuki's and Sayori's route probably dueled for the most well-liked route, and I have to admit that aside from the occasional cheesiness, Natsuki's route is my favorite of the main three. As for the Sayori route, well, here's a video on that. Regardless, things settled in at what I would say was a mostly positive feeling. It's not like the mod is well liked by everyone, and there's still some contention about which route is the best, but I'm glad that people are talking about that rather than how much the mod sucks. So, no doubt you've recognized that I say we'll talk about this later in regards to Zeno. That's because there is a lot of ground to cover. If I had to pick the biggest obstacle to the Purist Mod getting done, I say this with no offense intended, but it would have to be Zeno. So let's just get right on into it. Zeno went between two extremes: incredibly confident to the point of being a bit arrogant, or incredibly hard on himself to the point that most of us were kind of just exhausted by him. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it really did feel like after a while, the latter of those two was done purely for attention. Now, I say I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I have this screenshot, which Zeno will also likely deny because he denies any screenshots of him, wherein he blatantly admits that he just has stage fright. I also say it was done for attention, as whenever it was time for one of Zeno's moods, someone would have to comfort and tell him, "Oh no, your writing isn't as shitty as you say it is." Now, I can get self-confidence issues if it wasn't for the fact that, like, 3 days beforehand, he'd be on top of the world, and then this cycle would just constantly come up. As I said before, this was causing me to burn out, but the really big impact was that most of the writers were concerned that he'd either just straight up quit because he finally became so downtrodden that he'd leave, or that Zeno would make good on his threats of suicide, of which there were plenty. Zeno, of course, has denied these screenshots, saying they were photoshopped. The biggest concern was during the writing phase, because if Zeno left or offed himself, then we didn't want to use his route unless he gave us his permission somehow, or in the latter event, we wouldn't use it because we wanted to be respectful of him and not touch his work. But regardless, we grit our teeth, played along with his frequent cries of, "My work is shit," to tell him it wasn't, and kept going. He also had some interesting ideas about the quality of his work, They range from it has to be perfect and my work is perfect to I'm going to drag the mod down and the Sayori route will be a laughingstock to I'm going to be assassinated for my work. Zeno also even forced a rewrite of the ending to the Monica route, actually. Or he almost did. See, Zeno had an issue with the ending of the mod. Namely that it locks up and deletes all your save files. See, Zeno wanted me to change that. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that the game ending didn't mean Sayori died, or something like that. He also thought it invalidated his route, even though the Monica route clearly mentions that you did the Sayori route, and the general plotline again forces you to have gone through it. It was just too sad for him, and he didn't even give me any way to change it. He just didn't want it. The original plan, to appease Zeno in this case, was just to relock the Monica route after the credits, but you know, not force everything to be deleted. But then of course, yours truly forgot about that little small snippet about 6 months later when I was coding, and so voila! Completing Monica's route wiped your saves completely and locked the game down like the original DDLC. But to me, this was the proper ending because it's almost like you have to be consistent. Because in the Monica route, she acknowledges that it's a mod and that it'll end someday and it can't last forever. And you brought it back from the ending of DDLC where it was locked up and there wasn't anything left to do. So what better way to acknowledge the whole theme of the route and the mod that it won't last and you'll have to go back to the base game than to actually return you to that state. But alas, that's a different video. So we had that, you know. And then right before release, we also had some other issues. Let's call them power issues. You see, Zeno wanted power in like the most tyrannical sense possible. So let's take a look. First, Zeno got pissed that I didn't let him post in the known bugs channel. A channel for me specifically. A channel for me to specifically let people know what bugs I knew about and what was being worked on. A channel that he, someone who didn't know how to code, couldn't post in. He actually admits he got frustrated when it said he was unauthorized to send messages. And the issue with it? Well, in his own words, right here. I'm gonna let you read it, and then we'll delve into what it means. Did you read it? Good. Yes, Zeno wanted a channel where he had power. He argued all writers deserve such a thing, to talk about things like how the route was written, which could have already been done seeing as that we had the route channels prepared that people could join after they finished a route. So, you know, Zeno, what do you mean? We already have the... Oh! Yeah, Zeno wanted an actual echo chamber. He wanted a channel where no one else could post and he could just pontificate about the Sayori route. He wanted to feel like he mattered that desperately. He promptly got his ass called out for it and was swiftly knocked down. Of course, this wasn't the end of it. I have shown you multiple times how Zeno had stage fright by his own admittance. I have shown you how Zeno constantly put himself down in order to get attention. I have shown you how the guy just wanted to apparently have some power to friggin' monologue and have no one interrupt him because he didn't want anyone to be able to criticize him. But this part takes the cake. This man is so fucking smug and full of himself that he didn't think we'd catch him when he was saying some pretty choice words right in the Purist Mod server. What words were those? Well, to give you some context, Zeno had been working on another DDLC side project. Ah yes, Doki Doki Sunshine, as I've been told by my insiders. And then Zeno claimed that it was going to be longer than Purist Mod, and then what's this? We have writers assigned who are passionate about their dokis. Oh, what's that, Zeno? Are you implying that no one on the project was passionate about the girl they wrote for? Additionally, he apparently had said some pretty spicy things that were deleted, so I don't have screenshots of those. But then he says, and I quote, "It's not like it was my fault Purist Mod turned out the way it is." This man, who was so afraid of assassins coming after him for writing the Sayori route, who constantly needed validation that his writing wasn't completely dog shit, who wanted to have an actual echo chamber to let the world know of his thoughts because he couldn't handle criticism, suddenly has the balls to act like he was attempting to act as Purist Mod's guiding force and saving hand, but was put down like a rejected messiah. If anything, I have to applaud Zeno's absolute mad ladness, because he didn't say this in a PM and someone leaked it to us. No, this man said it right there, in the public Purist Mod server, where all of us could read it. Delicious. And it just so happens that yours truly was the one to find this, because I was curious to see how everyone thought of all the routes. For this section, I will not censor names, as this is all public stuff and publicly accessible in the Purist Mod server. So, I see this, and I confront Zeno, and I ask him to clarify what he meant. I point out that he said it in the public square, and thus can be questioned and criticized for it. Zeno says he has nothing to say to me. I ask again, what does he mean? Zeno attempts to deflect and play it off. I press again, citing he's implying that no one was passionate about their routes. Zeno claims I'm just seeing things. So I asked Zeno to explicitly state what he meant then. It was a perfect way to take it out. If he really meant more passionate, then he could have just said it right there and ended it. Zeno, in his infinite wisdom, just asked, "What's gotten into you, XD?" in a way to play it off. Scissor hops in and points out Zeno just slighted members of the team who had poured hours of their lives into the project. I point out that it's more damnation through implications. Zeno says he didn't mean it as an insult. I then ask him to clarify what he meant then exactly, because this would be a good time to let everyone know. I then point out that the second statement is a pretty bold statement. Zeno hangs himself by immediately saying, "Yes, it's your fault. You can feel the record scratch." I ask him to clarify what he meant by that. Zeno says he's tired of this and that he's offended that we've decided to witch hunt him. I point out it's not a witch hunt, and there's a reason we're asking him about this. I point out very specifically that saying it's not his fault Purist Mod ended up the way it is in itself a very damning statement towards members of the team. Twiggy asks how it was supposed to turn out. I ask Zeno what his big dissatisfaction was and admit that ultimately it's not anything really major. I'm just annoyed that Zeno's taking digs at everyone who's worked on the project. Zeno claims I'm misinterpreting and twisting his words. I then give him the floor and say, "Okay, tell us exactly what they mean, I won't interrupt you." Zeno says he has no intention of explaining anything when I keep attacking him for voicing an opinion, then claims I always ignored his opinions when he worked on the mod. I tell him he doesn't have to explain himself to me, but he should definitely explain himself to the other members of the team, so the floor is his. He can explain it right here, right now. Snake gets involved and says that reading a comment like that doesn't feel good. I then go back to Zeno's comment and say that I never ignored his opinions, it's just that I didn't feel like they had a strong enough argument. Let alone the fact that I let him have complete free reign over his mod. I didn't say you have to include Sayonara, I just said I think it would be a good idea to put it in there. Here's my arguments, but I'm not going to force you to make that. And here's a screenshot of me talking and discussing with him about my route, just to prove my point. Like, I listened to him, and I had an argument for why I did what I did. Anyways, I then take a stab at it, and ask, "Hey, are you just salty about the Monica route ending?" Zeno just leaves the server. And like that, the time bomb that had been ready to go off for well over a year finally detonates. But what's this? It's not over just yet? Fortunately, I happen to have an insider in Zeno's Doki Doki Sunshine server, and boy howdy, the ballad of Zeno Haze continues. Though I have been alerted by my insider that the server is dead, like, it's straight up deleted. It doesn't exist anymore. But as this video is specifically about Zeno to the Purist Mod, I'm going to stop it here. If anyone is curious though, I would be willing to make a video on the continued ballad of Zeno, as I still have a few of the screenshots that I've been sent. Additionally, to anyone who was formerly working on Doki Doki Sunshine, I have been alerted to the fact that there was a backup server to it. So if you want to send me a PM on Discord, I'd love to know more about that and just document it, because it seems to be a pretty wild ride. So that's a pretty basic walkthrough of the creation of the Purist Mod. From humble beginnings, is just a few dudes screwing around, to this damned monstrosity. Half of me feels like it was a mistake to bring this thing to completion, but the other half of me, well, I guess I met some pretty amazing people during it. I doubt I'd be playing 2 of the tabletop games I'm playing right now if I hadn't been on the Purist Mod team, and I really like the guys who I play them with. So I guess you could say it was worth all the stress, but I don't know about that. I kind of wish I hadn't burned out, as I really would have loved to help write that VN, but I mean, I guess, you know, if I struggled to showcase the development of Monica here, I guess I have a lot more to go if I wanted to write anything commercial tier. But I think it would have been an amazing opportunity that I guess I missed out on. Somehow though, this mod is still alive. I don't know how it hasn't been buried in the sands of internet time already, but I guess people still play Katawa Shoujo today. I for one hope that someday this mod really just does die off. Like, that day can't come fast enough, except of course the Koreans came in like, holy shit. They translated all of this shit in a week and then patched it, and there's streams of it with 2,000 people watching. This mod can't die fast enough. Either way, some of the other writers, i.e. not Zeno, did eventually start talking to each other even after the mod, and we occasionally chat to this day. We did have some fun at somewhat picking apart Reed shredding the Sayori route, which is ripe for the picking for thanks I'm cured material, and how the Yuri route was a mistake, particularly the chain email segment, and how the fact that the Ballad of Zeno involves him, I shit you not, writing effectively Purist Mod 2. It's been a wild ride. Either way, that's the end of it, from the beginning to the God willing someday end of the Purist Mod. I hope I can finally and absolutely close this chapter of my life now, because I am ready to forget about it. And well, I guess I will catch you guys whenever I do my next video, I guess. Catch you then.